The lunatic asylum. This dreaded institution was an inescapable landmark of Victorian Britain. These monumental buildings inspired fear and shame in equal measure.
Shame destroys people, you know.
The Victorians branded all kinds of people insane.
Says he was a lunatic. Quite shocking. We don't call anyone lunatic these days.
And being put into an asylum could be a life sentence.
Oh, no. Oh, that's terrible. So he never went back to his family.
Doctors tried all types of cures, some of which now seem crazy themselves. But treatments became even more disturbing as the asylum entered the 20th century. Now Sue Johnston revisits the asylum where she worked to learn about shock treatment.
Oh my goodness, that's it, that's it. Oof.
Leslie Joseph will solve the mystery behind her aunt's life in the asylum.
She went to Coney Hatch and... Sorry. She never came out.
Claire Sweeney and Christopher Biggins unlock their family's heartbreaking secrets.
I feel sorry for him. Must have been horrible.
Al Murray discovers sickening attitudes towards the mentally ill.
Not a distant cousin of Nazi thought, is it? It's disgusting.
And Ray Winston lays bare the shocking secrets of straight-laced Victorian society.
You're told someone in your family has been in an asylum is hard enough. To find out, you know, syphilis, that's a scary thought.
The Victorians prided themselves on their morality and civic duty. To help poor, unfortunate lunatics, they built asylums in every county across Britain, and the most intimidating of them all was in North London. When it was built, Coney Hatch was the biggest lunatic asylum in Europe, covering an area 3 times the size of Buckingham Palace. It was to this very asylum that actor Ray Winston's relative, James Stratton, was committed in 1875, aged just 36.
It's funny because I used to drink round this way, probably about 20 years ago, and had no knowledge of the fact that I had a connection with this place I'm going to look at now. I mean, look at this. It's an amazing building. It's almost like fit for a king. And probably there are a few kings who should have been in it.
Now plush private apartments, it was the most expensive asylum ever built. But its grand appearance hides a shady past.
But there's something very dark and very taboo about asylums. I didn't realise I had so much fear of these kind of places until we just drove up to it. I got a feeling once you came in here, you didn't come out.
In an era before the NHS, the asylum provided mental health care for working-class families like Ray's. But putting a loved one away was a last resort.
Nobody wanted to commit people to asylums,
Right.
so it was usually they would come in a very advanced stage.
Right.
When he was living at home, he was having lots of delusions and
Yes.
fantasies, strange ideas.
James's wife, Hannah, Ray's great-great-grandmother, would have struggled to cope with her husband's madness.
He refuses food,
Yeah,
talks
so-
very incoherently,
Yeah,
gets very excited, tears up his clothes, and said he's going to die.
yeah. And Hannah says that he's threatened to kill her. So he was clearly very, very disturbed indeed. Yeah.
Disaster.
With 5 children at home, Hannah needed her increasingly dangerous husband out of the house. She took him to the workhouse infirmary, where he was certified as being of unsound mind and sent to the asylum.
Hannah provided this information which assisted the case for his certification,
Yeah,
if you like.
she helped him along
That's right.
the way.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, for a woman to actually do that, it must have been tough,
yeah.
because you're putting your own man away.
One of the most difficult things for Hannah was that there was enormous stigma about being admitted into an institution like this.
I think it still is today.
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah.
On admission, James would have been checked for lice, disease, and signs of insanity. Asylums were strictly divided by sex, and on each side, inmates were placed in different wards depending on their behavior. The most disturbed patients were sent to the fearsome back wards, where they were locked in day and night.
Because he was so disturbed, it's very likely that he might have been on one of the wards for what they call the more refractory patients, the difficult, more troublesome patients. Some wards could be pretty brutal places. A lot of the male attendants had been in the army before, and, you know, they had their own rules.
I suppose the only way they thought they can keep him in line is give him a clump.
Well,
really, yeah.
that was one way, certainly, yeah.
Asylum attendants had little training and were supervised by just a handful of doctors. Even well-meaning staff struggled with patients who often came to the asylum after long periods of neglect. But the new system was a vast improvement on how the insane had once been treated. Before the 19th century, the mad were seen as little more than animals, to be locked away in squalid conditions, often chained, caged, or beaten. The most notorious institution was Bedlam, where the public could pay to gawp at the insane. But Victorian reformers wanted the new asylums to be tranquil retreats for the mentally ill poor who couldn't afford private care. And among them was Claire Sweeney's step-great-great-grandfather, John Sweeney.
So this is the census of England and Wales, 1901. Oh my goodness, lunatic asylum.
The 1901 census lists John in Ballymona Asylum on the Isle of Man.
So here's my great-great-grandfather, John Sweeney, and he was a patient. He was married, and when this census was done, he was 71. He was a tailor. Oh. And then it says he was a lunatic, which is quite shocking. It just seems weird to have like a family member's name here with the words lunatic, you know. We don't call anyone lunatic these days.
Claire wants to find out whether John's old age was part of the problem.
Just had it with my grandma, who's just died of dementia, and she wasn't a lunatic, she was ill. And if that could have been his problem, it was an illness, and suddenly at the age of 71 he's branded a lunatic. I'm curious to find out why and how and when.
Ballymona, where John Sweeney was sent, was one of over 120 county lunatic asylums built by the Victorians in every corner of the country. It was demolished in the 1990s, so Claire's come to Castle Rushen, where the island's lunatics were kept before the asylum was built.
So what we have here is something which will tell you a little bit about when John came to be in the asylum.
October 1900. John Sweeney, suffering from senile dementia. It's what I said. It's what I said. So he wasn't a lunatic.
Well, in this period, the word lunatic is a legal term. So anyone who's in the asylum who has been certified, they were legally designated a lunatic.
But this is an illness. He's branded a lunatic. It's so awful to see those words on the paper, you know.
Senile dementia was first used in the 19th century to describe old people with confusion and memory loss. Just like today, Victorian families faced the problem of caring for a sick elderly relative. And for John Sweeney's wife Agnes and his daughter Janet, the only option was the lunatic asylum.
Nowadays, there's medication. How would they have been treated then?
Treatment-wise, he would have been given very, very little. All they could do is keep him controlled and contained, but it's likely that John would have gone to a ward for chronic lunatics. So he would have been surrounded by people who were not expected to get better.
So that wouldn't have been good for his mindset, would it?
It would have been quite a miserable environment.
The strictly regimented day would start at around 6 a.m. when patients were woken and checked over. After breakfast, patients who were well enough were herded off to work. Asylums were self-sufficient communities with their own farms, kitchens, laundries and workshops. And nearly all the hard graft came from the patients.
They were like little villages in a sense. John, if he was able to work, then he would have gone and done that in the morning, come back at a regular time for lunch, back to work in the afternoon, back to eat in the evening, and in bed probably quite early.
But the asylum wasn't all work and no play. There were Saturday cricket matches against the locals, and for a special treat, a dance.
discipline, order, regiment, and that was seen as a route to an orderly mind, if not a healthy mind.
This tough regime wasn't designed to punish the mad. It was actually meant to help them get better. The Victorians called it moral treatment, and one of the places it originated was across the Channel, in France. This is where comedian Al Murray's famous ancestor turned when his family fell apart. William Thackeray is now recognized as one of the great Victorian novelists, up there with Dickens. But in 1840, he was a struggling writer in his 20s with 2 young daughters and a wife, Isabella, who had just had a catastrophic breakdown.
This is the Maison Santé.
So this is where Isabella was being
This
treated?
is where Isabella would actually have been treated, and it was incredibly famous, bringing people from Britain and indeed all over Europe.
Isabella was just 23 and suffering from postnatal depression. She tried to kill herself by jumping off a ship. Thackeray was desperate to keep his young family together and get his wife well again.
This was a horror story for them.
Yeah.
You know, everything they'd heard about asylums in England was that they were terrible places that would make you mad even if you weren't mad when you went in. So Thackeray is coming to France because he wants his wife to have moral treatment. And moral treatment was an incredible innovation.
The idea of the treatment, revolutionary at the time, was that the mad could be cured rather than just locked up. Thackeray wanted the best for his wife, and he hoped Europe's famous doctors could help her.
And it's this idea of hope that's so different from what would have gone before in the 18th century. The idea that there is a hope of cure.
But this top-of-the-range treatment did not come cheap.
Would this have been a financial burden for Thackeray?
It was an incredible burden. And this is a time when he's broke. It's not an easy time for him to be caring for his sick wife.
Yeah, well, and the two little girls
Two little
as well,
girls,
who she
yeah.
can't be a mother to.
No.
It's a total crisis. His family's fallen apart. His career isn't established yet. It's costing him a fortune, and he doesn't even know if it's going to work.
Exactly. He has hope, though.
Yeah.
And that's what he's paying for, and he's willing to pay through the nose for it.
Al has never before seen the treasure trove of letters that Thackeray wrote about his wife's condition. They reveal his disappointment at Isabella's failure to recover and his shock at some of the other patients in the asylum.
If she had stopped for a century at that place, she would never have been well. It was horrid to see wild, fierce women rambling about in the garden. I felt how wrong it was to keep her in such company.
We actually have images from this time of the kinds of patients that he was seeing. These are the wild women.
God,
And
it's shocking.
you can see why Thackeray might have been worried. He's beginning to think that maybe she's in the wrong place.
And when Isabella's doctors admitted defeat, Thackeray made a radical decision.
He isn't just putting his wife away, he wants to be with her. In fact, he's busting her out of the asylum.
Thackeray could take Isabella home and continue the search for a treatment. But in the pauper asylums, inmates were forbidden to leave without permission. In the Victorian era, the number of so-called lunatics exploded, and moral treatment wasn't curing as many as was hoped. Part of the problem was decidedly immoral behavior outside the asylum walls. Men of all ages were contracting what we would call STDs, one of which could develop into a violent, incurable madness. After 4 months at Colney Hatch, Ray Winston's relative, James Stratton, was showing all the signs.
Since the last century, J.S. has been exceedingly violent, noisy and destructive. His delusions are now of a very extravagant kind. He has torn the hair from his head and pubis.
Yeah.
So he's all around his genitals. He's been ripping that as well.
Yeah.
His gait
Yeah.
is unsteady, so he's hardly walking.
That's right.
So he's in a lot of trouble, this guy.
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
JS is now in an advanced stage of GN paresis.
Yeah, so that's general paresis, which
Right.
was also called general paralysis, GPI,
What would that be?
syphilis. Tertiary syphilis. Yeah, it's the final
So that's
stage
the
of
madness.
syphilis.
That's the
Yeah.
madness.
Despite their buttoned-up exterior, the Victorians were riddled with venereal disease. As many as 1 in 10 men in cities were infected, and they spread it by visiting prostitutes and having illicit affairs. Syphilis sufferers could go on to develop a horrific third and final stage, general paralysis of the insane. GPI was a new phenomenon in the 19th century, and it was a death sentence.
James Stratton died in this asylum at 8:55 a.m. o'clock on the 22nd.
I'm afraid it was a really pretty unpleasant
I bet
death.
it was.
Horrible.
I bet it
yeah.
was.
And he was only 36.
He was 36 years of age.
Yeah.
Okay. That's horrific.
Yeah.
Hannah was now widowed with 5 children. The stigma of the asylum hung over her, but she also faced the risk that her very own husband could have infected her with syphilis.
I've never been confronted by anything like that before. You told someone in your family has been in an asylum is hard enough. And to find out, you know, syphilis, and it's a scary thought. And I want to know whether he's given that disease to my grandmother. And then maybe I'll know why we didn't have this information, you know? Maybe the shame. Shame destroys people, you know? And that's probably something that I need to find out.
Victorian society was God-fearing and conservative. But behind this respectable veneer lay a dirty secret. An epidemic of sexually transmitted disease. And this wasn't just a social problem. It was driving up numbers in the asylum. Some asylums saw nearly a third of male patients with GPI, the final stage of syphilis. Ray Winston's just discovered that his relative, James Stratton, was one such patient. He wants to know what this meant for James's widow, Hannah, his great-great-grandmother.
It's difficult these days to have a major mental illness, okay? But back then, it was even worse. The terrible tragedy of GPI in Victorian England was the stigma around it.
Victorians believed that men like James had brought their madness upon themselves through their own immoral behaviour.
What do they think it is, then? Do they think it's a punishment from God?
They thought it was all part of just being dissolute, sexual indulgence, okay? Having too much sex, too much self-abuse.
Self-abuse?
Oh, yeah.
They're saying, what, he knocks one out?
Well, yeah, I think that's the idea
Right.
there. But also general dissipation about alcohol, about living impure and improper lifestyle, and sex, drugs, rock and roll. That's what they think it is.
Everything you kind of like it.
Speak for yourself. Okay. And they meant it morally. And so for Hannah, she's married to someone who's died of some morally degenerate disorder. And
right, so the shame on Hannah.
Yeah, the shame's on Hannah.
Syphilis can take around 20 years to develop into GPI. James died at 36, so he would have caught it as a young man.
Would it be possible, then, for Hannah to have caught syphilis from James?
Well, it's only infectious for about 2 to 3 years. And then it will have gone latent or dormant.
Right.
If James had given syphilis to Hannah, it would have infected their children in the womb. But James and Hannah had 5 healthy children, so James can't have been contagious when they were first married.
It's almost impossible that Hannah, at this point, has got syphilis. Looking good.
So everything seemed to be dandy, didn't it?
But in 1874, just a year before James went into the asylum, Hannah and James had a 6th child, and everything changed.
This is a death certificate.
Elizabeth Stratton, female, 3 months old.
Mm-hmm.
And it says syphilis from birth.
For a child, syphilis was utterly devastating.
Yeah, all right.
Half of them would die, and to be honest, some of those were the lucky ones. This is a kind of typical picture of congenital syphilis from Victorian times.
Oh, my God. So she'd been nurturing her baby, Elizabeth, for 3 months, like this?
Yeah.
Yeah. OK.
Congenital syphilis affected the eyes, or affected the mouth and all the mucous membranes, the rashes, the skin, the bones. I'm afraid, you know, the child would have been suffering.
OK. Poor little thing.
Yeah.
This horrific revelation brings yet more bad news for Ray.
So now there's no doubt that Hannah has got syphilis, And we've got to think about how has this happened, because we know she didn't have it for the previous years. Where she got it from?
So the two options we've got is James was either a player or Hannah had a little dabble. See, I can't see Hannah giving it to him. She's got 5 kids to look after. Where's she going to get the time?
It's likely that James was unfaithful, caught syphilis a second time, and gave it to Hannah.
She would never forgive him, would she?
Well, I guess not.
Oh, you wouldn't? you wouldn't, because it's what he's done to his child, it's what he's done to his wife.
Syphilis was a time bomb. Hannah now had a 1 in 4 chance of developing GPI and dying the same grim death as James.
2 things can happen. It could just go away and she'd be fine, or she could go on to get GPI.
Oh, it's like a Russian roulette?
Yeah, even worse odds than Russian roulette, I think.
My God, yeah.
The cards are pretty stacked against her at this point in time.
Yeah.
It's not looking good.
Wow.
In the Victorian era, the number of people locked away in asylums went up tenfold. Despite their good intentions, the Victorians didn't really understand mental illness. Many people were put into asylums for conditions that we treat very differently today, like epilepsy, learning difficulties, and Alzheimer's. Claire Sweeney was shocked to learn that her ancestor John was labelled a lunatic while suffering from senile dementia.
We have photos of people of around John's age from different asylums, just to give you a little bit of an idea of what they might have looked like, a sense of how they might have been feeling.
Gosh. They just look so tortured, don't they? They're being held into position, aren't they? Physically held for the photograph. It's just the look in their eyes. I mean, look at this guy here. Just a look of fear, isn't it? This poor guy. It's so sad, these pictures. It's tragic.
Senile dementia sufferers like John were just the kind of inmate that asylum doctors didn't want to deal with.
Lots of doctors said that they didn't like having people suffering from senile dementia in the asylum, basically because they were clogging up the institutions. They're incurable, they're not truly insane, they're damaged merely by decay of nature. The asylum isn't just there to be a medical institution to cure people, it's a social institution. It's a place which takes in the people that can't be coped with elsewhere. These huge institutions were just filling up, and every time they build a new asylum, it fills up again very, very quickly. So the more institutions you build, apparently the more lunatics there are.
By 1900, there were 100,000 asylum inmates. And while many recovered and went home, left behind were a mass of chronic and incurable cases. Many asylums held over 1,000 patients, 3 times the number that they were built for. In these new, supersized and overcrowded asylums, order and control took precedence over treatment and care.
My grandma was in a care home. She was treated with a lot of love and affection. And, I mean, it's such a different treatment then, isn't it? You know, to be put away and, you know, you look at these pictures, quite traumatising, aren't they?
After 2 years of asylum life, John's family were given even more upsetting news.
Death, 73 years of age. Gosh. 73? My dad's older than that now, Ken Sweeney. And he looks 20 years younger than these guys. It's tragic.
The Victorians' desire to cure the insane led to some bizarre experiments. Phrenologists believed that lumps and bumps on a person's head could diagnose personality. And private doctors invented a device to treat hysteria, which caused a real buzz with women, the vibrator. By 1841, Al Murray's ancestor William Thackeray was willing to try some peculiar remedies to get back the wife he loved. First up was a fashionable treatment in Germany.
Floods of people were coming to receive the new treatment called hydropathy.
At 5 o'clock in the morning, Mrs. Thack begins to sweat in blankets. At 8, they pour buckets of water over her. At 12, she takes an enormous douche for 5 minutes. At 5, sweating again and more buckets of ice-cold water.
The spa doctors believed that water would purify the body and remove the cause of illness.
And these are not easy treatments. It's being packed in ice-cold sheets for hours at a time with cold water being poured on top of them.
This sounds like the sort of thing Gwyneth Paltrow would pay a lot of money to do. It sounds awful.
It is my worst nightmare.
Unlike pauper asylums, this upmarket spa carried no stigma.
It's popular, it's fashionable, and it's respectable. It was famous for its discretion, and no one would tell whether you were there for your nerves or your gout or any other condition that ailed you.
Okay.
The water cure failed. An increasingly desperate Thackeray was now prepared to try a less respectable treatment.
So you've been magnetised by old Madame Dildy, and the magnetising has done you good. Well, that sounds like another
This is another one of the new
treatment.
therapies. Animal magnetism
Yeah.
was the idea that there was a kind of spiritual fluid that one person of great charisma and character and health could convey to another and heal them in some way. Now, it involved a laying on of hands, and because of this sexual taint, it becomes quite scandalous, in Britain especially. But it's a sign, in a way, of his increasing desperation that even that he's willing to try. He doesn't have much to lose.
Yeah, well, he's lost everything.
Yeah.
It's a cruel world, though, they're living in, where you're having all this stuff dangled in front of you as a possibility, a tantalising idea that there's a solution, and so far, the top doctor hasn't worked, and now with a quack that I don't expect it's going to work. He must be thinking at this point, well, we're in now until she dies, or until I die, this won't stop. There's absolutely no suggestion that life's going back to normal now.
5 years into his wife's illness, and with Isabella still only in her 20s, Thackeray was losing hope. He'd had to leave his daughters with his mother in Paris, while he toiled in London to support the family. Al finds his letters are becoming increasingly poignant.
Do you remember just after the baby was born, and my dear little woman looking so happy and pretty? Oh, for those days. I'm getting weary of being alone. This is a broken man writing. And reading someone's hope being extinguished is tough. It's nasty. And, I mean, I'm thinking about what would I do in this situation. You'd worry about your daughters. I mean, I've 2 girls, similar age gap. You'd worry about what to do about them. He's lonely, his children are upset, and his wife's lost to him. I mean, it's agony. Oh, for those days.
Al's family lost a mother to mental illness, but Ray Winston's lost a father and their breadwinner. James Stratton was 36 when he died of GPI in the asylum, leaving his widow Hannah to fend for herself in London's poverty-stricken East End. She had 5 children, and Ray has just discovered that Hannah had also been infected with syphilis. He wants to know how she coped.
So, I just wondered, for Hannah, what was left for her? I mean, where would she go? What would she do?
Hannah's in a really difficult position right now. The horror of having someone in the asylum is almost as bad as being in the asylum yourself. It's really something that Victorian Britain would have seen as socially disgusting.
My God.
And she's destitute. She's lost her breadwinner. How is she going to survive? How's she going to look after those 5 kids?
You know, with 5 kids, you've got to go out looking for something. And what choices does she have?
She doesn't really have any choices. Women, in this case, we often see falling into what we call casual prostitution. That's desperate times calling for desperate measures.
But if Hannah were even suspected of being a prostitute, she could be hauled off the streets by the authorities who were clamping down on the rise of venereal disease. If word spread that she'd lost a baby to syphilis, Hannah could be locked away.
It's a real danger. You would have seen women on the street that this had happened to. And it's almost as if women just disappear.
But what happens to your children? You've got 5 children that are going to be left to fend for themselves. Probably end up in a workhouse.
Exactly that. This is a fight for survival. It's one woman against the weight of Victorian society.
I suppose that the first thing you'd want to do is run away. Run away and hide. Because if that's the community know what you've got and that's hanging over your head, you'd want to run away. Is she?
No. Hannah actually manages to find another way out.
We know that she finds someone else. She remarries.
My God. Hannah Stratham, and she's a widow. William Durham, Bill Durham.
Yeah.
And his profession is bricklayer, so he's a working guy.
He's a breadwinner, someone who's going to provide for her family.
36-year-old Hannah married William just 8 months after her first husband's death.
It's a fast remarriage, it's quick. And
Tell me about it. Right. William was 27 years of age and Hannah's put herself down as 30.
yeah, she's shaved a few years off, yeah.
Good girl. She's using her head. It seems to me she's put the old rod out and drawn him in a little bit, but I understand why. And you've got to do what you've got to do. And hopefully it was for the right reasons, that she loved the man. But at the same time, I think probably she's put her kids first.
However you look at it, she is a survivor.
Yeah. I love the spirit of this woman. I think she's a tough girl. What a woman.
The fact that Hannah doesn't turn to prostitution or end up an alcoholic and died dead at 40 is amazing.
Yeah. She married a younger man as well, so she was a game old girl. You know.
Yeah.
But Hannah was still in danger. The syphilis from her first husband could still develop into GPI, a one-way ticket to the asylum and an excruciating death. In the 19th century, 300,000 people were labelled lunatics and put away. For working-class families, the asylum was the only option for an insane relative. But if you could afford to pay, there was another solution: private care. Author William Thackeray spent 5 years trying to keep his wife Isabella out of the asylum. His 3 times great-grandson, Al Murray, wants to find out what happened when Thackeray brought her back to London in 1845.
So what does he do in London? What are his options?
Well, he did visit an asylum, and he was so horrified by what he saw that there was no question that he was going to place Isabella in an asylum.
Instead, Thackeray found a family outside London who cared for Isabella. In his lifetime, he spent over £3,000 on her care, nearly £150,000 in today's money.
This seems gentler and in a way more humane.
He didn't abandon her.
No.
He maintained her support until his death, and indeed he provided a pension for her carers.
I really get the sense he's a man to whom doing the right thing matters enormously.
Yes.
For the rest of his life, Thackeray was a single father to their 2 daughters. He died in 1863, but Isabella outlived him by 30 years. She finally died, aged 78, having lived with mental illness for over 50 years. But history was about to repeat itself.
And that sort of looks like the end of the story.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, though, there is a little bit more to tell. It's rather sad to report that just a year before Isabella's death, Laura, her granddaughter, is placed in an institution.
Thackeray and Isabella's daughter, Minnie, had married the Victorian writer Leslie Stephen, and the couple had a daughter, Laura.
There was Laura.
She looks like she might smile any second.
Yes.
Laura lost her mother very young, leaving her in her father's care. And when she was just 22, her family put her into an asylum.
I didn't know. I didn't know about her.
No.
Having seen what Thackeray managed to do, this seems tougher. And all of it's been tough so far, and this seems even worse. Thackeray, he wouldn't have done this. I mean, you know, these are intelligent people plugged into culture, and by the time we get to Stephen's generation, they can't cope with it. They don't know how to deal with it. I mean, that in itself it shows you how big an issue this is, or difficult, what hard stuff it is. You know, when I started on this whole thing, I was thinking, that's all a long time ago. I'm not going to judge him or find for or against Thackeray, whatever he decides to do, but I'm quite angry with Leslie Stephen right now.
Yeah.
I was worrying about Isabella when she first got ill, looking back at it. I'm so worried about her. I mean, she's my family. I mean, I'm dreading the next bit of this story. I really am.
By the time Laura Stephen was put away, high hopes about curing the mad had crumbled. And for inmates who didn't get better, the asylum cemetery was the end of the road. A pauper grave was a shameful end to many a sad story. Claire Sweeney's discovered that John Sweeney's wife Agnes and daughter Janet reclaimed his body from the asylum to bury him in this cemetery near their home. She's looking for the plot to pay her respects.
I can't see.
So this
is the plot. Oh. There's no headstone? Oh. So does that mean that there was never a headstone? Or it's been damaged, or what does it mean?
It seems that there was never a headstone.
Agnes and Janet Sweeney were too poor to afford a headstone, but they did find the money for a plot big enough to hold them all.
Oh. Oh, that's really... Agnes Sweeney. October the 1st, they got buried together. Oh, they buried him. With that in mind, so they could get buried together. Oh. Oh, it's lovely, that.
And when daughter Janet died in 1925, she too was buried with her parents.
The same plot. Janet Sweeney. So it's so upsetting that the three of them are in there and there's no headstone for them. Oh. Tell you what, though, there was a lot of love, wasn't there? They all got buried together and there was a lot of love there.
All together at the end.
The family that were torn apart by the asylum were reunited in death.
I hated to see the word lunatic branded next to John Sweeney. You know, I thought there was going to be a tragic ending, and it's just turned out to be a really beautiful love story.
But for many families, a death in the asylum was not the end of the story. Ray has come to the East End Church, where his great-great-grandmother Hannah remarried after her husband died in the asylum.
And there's the church.
Yeah.
It's funny, I've known that church nearly all my life. You know, from working in the Spitalfields Market, being around this area when I was a kid, but to know that there is a connection with the church, you know.
Hannah had fought to shake off the stigma of the asylum, but was still carrying the ticking time bomb of syphilis. Ray wants to know how the story ends.
Well, in 1878, we have this birth registered.
Thomas Willie, boy.
Yeah. This is the first healthy child for Hannah in 7 years. And this is your great-grandfather.
God. So that's where that is now the connection.
Yeah.
So that is like going bang, switch it on, and it is like an electric bolt going through you, because the next lot is going to be my name.
Yep. Hannah's luck was changing. She had 2 healthy babies with her new husband, and the 5 children she'd struggled so hard to save became part of this new family.
So she kept them kids together?
Yeah. And William took them in as well.
That's quite incredible. My God.
And she's faced that taint that comes from having someone in the asylum.
Yes.
And she hasn't left. That is real strength of character.
Absolutely. She must have had a moment when James was very, very ill, because she knew he was going to die, that she said, well, I've got to get myself out of this, and I've got to get my children out of this. So I think she made her mind up, you know, she was going to fight. She wasn't going to give up.
She defies the odds.
I'm very happy.
Good.
And I'm very proud as well.
It's a character trait of strength and survival.
And it lasts for generations.
Yeah.
I understand now more about my mob, in a way.
Yeah.
Women in my family are very strong, you know, and that kind of fight comes from her. She had that, you know, and if we can all just take a little bit of that, and I hope to God that I've got that somewhere, and I hope, more importantly, my kids have that. That's the most important thing in the world.
Ray's family owe their existence to Hannah's fighting spirit. Finally, he wants to know if Hannah succumbed to the same horrible death as her first husband.
So it's 6th of October 1902, and she died of chronic bronchitis.
Yeah, she dies at home, of old age, surrounded by that family that she's kept together for so long. Her death, in comparison to her first husband's tragic death in the asylum that was so violent and so awful, is completely different.
I'm not sad for her. I'm amazed by her. I'd rather that than finding out that I was related to the King of England. I'm very proud of her. I'm very proud of her being part of my family. Yeah. Thank you, darling.
You're welcome.
You're lovely. Gorgeous. Thank you very much. I'm absolutely over the moon with that.
Ray's family fought to escape the shadow of the asylum. But as the 20th century dawned, attitudes to the mentally ill would grow even more extreme. Next week, Christopher Biggins is confronted by a long-buried family secret.
No!
Yes.
Are you serious?
Yes, and...
He died in this asylum?
Leslie Joseph discovers why her aunt was locked away for a lifetime.
Staying here for 60 years, until it was practically knocked down around her. That's a long journey.
Al Murray is shocked by attitudes towards his relative.
That is not a distant cousin of Nazi thought, is it? That you're not that far off from sterilising them and you're not that far off from murdering them.
And actress Sue Johnston goes back to the mental hospital where she worked in the 1960s.
Quite shocking to see somebody wiped of personality, dead eyes.
Can Robson Green's Colin finally be taken seriously? It's back to Northern Lights over on ITV3. We head west on the railroad in Hell on Wheels over on ITV4, while on ITV Encore, the conclusion to our drama, The Town. Next year on ITV, though, the news at 10.